So good afternoon, everyone. I think this is certainly a first for me. I suspect a first for everyone here to a virtual book launch. So you're all very welcome. My job as your host, which I'm delighted to do, is to seamlessly get us through from this introduction through various inputs and comments in relation to the publication onto a Q&A session towards the end. And ideally, we plan to finish about 5:15. So just let me get my notes up and I'll say a few words by way of introduction. So I understand that as well as family and friends of our 5 esteemed authors, the publication has also generated interest from a wide range of individuals, including those currently working in community work settings and those in training. And I think we even have some international interest, so you're all very welcome. For those of you who I don't know, my name is Ken Milroy, and as I say, I'm honoured to be your host for today's launch of this fine book. One of the things that we will have is a Q&A session towards the end, and there is a Q&A tab on the chat at the top. And if you have any questions that you'd like to pose our authors or indeed our guests, if you could put those in, that would be grateful. So just a wee bit about why I'm personally interested in the publication. I presently undertake a governance and a representational role in the college sector, locally here in the Northeast, as well as nationally. I retired from full-time community work in 2018, after some 40 years commencing as a part-time youth worker for Angus Council and ending up in a leadership role within a third sector organisation. Throughout my various roles that I undertook, whether that was a frontline worker, a manager, policy officer, or a leadership position, I increasingly learnt of the critical importance of demonstrating the impact of the work that I was involved in, showing the difference that I was making through the work. It was particularly so when I was leading a third sector organisation, and in fact, the evidence of the work was really the bread and butter as I attempted to grow and develop the organisation. Through impactful services, winning competitive public sector contracts, grants from charitable and philanthropic bodies. So I have a personal interest and a lot of learning that came with my experience. But what I didn't do to any extent was to write down and share that experience in terms of what my endeavours were. So I take my hat off to Karen, to Sue, to Kirsty, to Ed and Kath for taking the time to do that and sharing their experience and their thoughts and understanding. I think the whole business of writing and thinking about it is important, but it's important that that it's communicated as well. So the next person I'm going to introduce is Sarah from Policy Press. It's all very well us writing it down and getting the lessons right, but unless we find some means of communicating it, you know, that's not going to be the best practice. I do understand that our esteemed authors enjoyed this as a collaborative effort, bouncing off ideas each other. But I am aware that it was towards the end of the process that the fights broke out when they were talking about the cover and they couldn't decide on the colours. So I don't know how that was resolved in terms of the fights, but I wonder if resolving conflict might be the theme of a sequel. I pose that. Anyway, enough of me. If I can introduce Sarah to say a few words. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Ken. So I'm the commissioning editor for community development books at Policy Press. And I do remember that, not a tussle about the cover, but the whole process of putting the book together from my point of view was really, really smooth. But then there was that little moment, oh no, are we ever going to be able to agree a cover? But we did, and I think everybody's delighted with it. Very strangely, here you see me working from home. I haven't seen a physical copy of the book because I haven't been into the office. Thank you, I can see it now, it looks lovely. Haven't been into the office. We're working in unusual ways like everybody, so I'm really looking forward to going back, because even if I did go into the office, books aren't being delivered there. They're in another colleague's office somewhere in Bristol. So haven't seen it, but absolutely delighted to be here at the launch of it, also my first ever virtual book launch. We're really proud of our publishing in community development. You know, Margaret Ledwith's classic textbook that's been through 3 editions, and our Rethinking Community Development series. And we're also really proud of our evidence, our impact publishing. We published What Works back in 2000. We have the Evidence and Policy Journal. So when Karen sent me this proposal, I was absolutely delighted, because it spoke to 2 major areas of our publishing. But even more importantly than that, what I saw very clearly from the proposal stage was that this was a book that would be very useful for people in their practice, but also would really make a real change I felt, to the work overall, the impact of community work overall in the whole system, thereby serving everybody. So it was a real no-brainer to say, yes, please, we would love to publish it. And it was a wonderful experience working with Karen and everybody else to get the book out in the world and into people's hands, both electronically and in print form. And it's not just publishing books that we do here at Policy Press, and Karen, Kirsty, Ed, Sue, everybody have been great in that they've also written blogs for us on the back of the book. We have a wonderful blog called Transforming Society, which is what the tagline is: a space where research, evidence and critique can create positive social change. So I'm really grateful to all of you for putting your work out there, not just in the form of a book, and great, books are fantastic, but also on the blog, so that we've had some really timely, short, thoughtful pieces that I think will really will bring about positive social change, just as the book will. So it just remains for me to say thank you all very much for coming today. Wish I could be there with a glass of champagne. I really do. Maybe I'll have one later. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the webinar.
Okay, thank you, Sarah, and again, just thanks for your support in the publication. So the next person I'd like to introduce, the next speaker, is Sheila Brown. Sheila is the lead inspector for community learning and development with Education Scotland. She has a wealth of experience as a community worker, a service manager, as well as a leadership role in relation to policy and strategy. In her current role, she has a lead role in supporting quality and improvement for CLD, including providing guidance to local authorities and partners in meeting regulatory requirements. Sheila, can I invite you to say a few words from your perspective on the publication?
Yes, thanks very much, Ken. Yes, thank you for that introduction. I was just reflecting as I was preparing some notes for this, that and thinking about what you said, Ken. I've been in community work practice now for, I think it's over 40 years, which makes me feel extremely old. I've been an HMI for about 12, 13 years. And before that, as I say, worked in quite a range of settings, mostly within local authorities. So I suppose looking at this, I'm very happy to endorse the book. I was involved initially, that colleagues will remember, in some of the early discussions around it, and hoped to be more involved, but due to other pressures wasn't able to do that. But I was very keen to see how things went, and was delighted to receive my copy of the book, an actual copy, which is great, and that's good to have, because it's something I'll certainly be planning to use, and I've already mentioned it and discussed it with other colleagues. So I'd say I was involved initially in a kind of critical friend role, if you like. However, I suppose reflecting again, one of the real strengths, I think, of community work is that engagement of people of all ages, the engagement with people and changing people's lives. And I think that's certainly what I'm sure most of us who are involved in community work, community learning, would agree with. It's that process that changes people's lives. However, we're not always, or certainly haven't been in the past, as good at recording it and demonstrating the difference we make. It's that thing about being able to own what we do and what we do well, and really endorse that difference. And I think this is where this book can certainly come in very useful. I also think we need to make better use of research and better use of academic research to, in a sense, back up what we're trying to do. I think that, again, is very important. And I would link this back to a publication that was produced earlier this year, and it was called Improving Life's Chances and Empowering Communities. And it was a summary of all of our community learning inspection work over a 3-year period, where we visited all local authorities for the purposes of inspection. And it was this happened just pre-COVID. It was last January. And I was thinking about that when I was trying to link to some of those things around improvement. And one of the main areas that we found for improvement is that thing around how we measure performance against aims, objectives and targets, and the use of appropriate data. And it's something that was found that requires improvement in around half of local authorities. So that's a wee bit of a challenge for us. There were lots of positives came out of the report, but that was one of the areas that we need to really think about. How do we demonstrate impact? How do we demonstrate the difference that we make? And I think this is where the book can certainly come in handy, and some of the messages from the book can come in handy. What I liked about it was the thinking about impact at the start. It kind of sets the scene, I thought, well, and it focuses on self-evaluation at the end. There's quite a bit around that then, and that's something that I'm very keen on, passionate around, that in order to improve, you need to know yourself first, and how well are we doing, those kind of questions that we ask. And those of you who will be familiar with our quality frameworks will certainly know that. So I think that focus on self-evaluation is really important, and it's important to take that forward, that those links, that was also identified in the Improving Life Chances report around improving self-evaluation, particularly self-evaluation with partners. One of the other things I also really liked about the book was where it mentions around the use of challenge questions, and it's something that we've developed as HMIs in our quality frameworks, around using those challenge questions to ask people, to get people to reflect on what they're doing, ask themselves those questions, because I believe it shouldn't really take us to come in and tell you how well you're doing. You should know that yourself in terms of your own self-evaluation and your own ability to move forward. So I like the reference to those, and I think on a very practical level for practitioners at all levels, that will be very useful. So thank you for asking me to come today to say a few words, and I did endorse the book, and thanks very much for inviting me, and I hope the rest of this afternoon goes well. I think your mic's off, Ken.
Oh, sorry about that. So many thanks, Sheila, for that and for those words. So I'm going to move on to our second speaker in relation to the publication. It's fitting that our next speaker is from the Northeast, given all the authors' connection with the Northeast. Laurence Findlay is presently the Aberdeenshire Council's Director of Education and Children's Services, and this includes responsibilities for CLD. So as one of the authority's most senior staff, I can only begin to imagine the kind of challenges that Laurence is facing in a day-to-day basis, but particularly just now during the pandemic. as he tries to balance political, financial and community demands in that very senior role. So I'm guessing, Laurence, that access to sound evidence on the impact of work is something that you would find invaluable in terms of the challenge that you face in managing CLD. Do you want to say a few words?
Yes, thank you, Ken, and good afternoon, everyone. And I'm absolutely delighted to be with you all today at what is also my first virtual book launch, and the first book launch I've ever been at without a glass in my hand. And I'm also a bit concerned there, Ken, that you said I am presently Director of Education and Children's Services. That made me think that perhaps you know something that I don't know. However, I'll take it as it was intended, I'm absolutely sure. So I'm delighted to have been invited to say a few words at today's launch for the impact of community work. This book is really timely and it's also really important in my opinion. And our communities, as you reflected there, Ken, have been so adversely affected by the pandemic over the past year, and they've been affected in very different ways. And as the saying goes, we've all been in the same storm, but we've been in very different boats. And to that end, good, high quality community work has never been more important for our communities than it is right now. But it needs to be well informed, it needs to be data led, and above all, it needs to be promoting the use of interventions which can demonstrate and impact which can demonstrate impact on communities and individuals within those communities. And this can only be achieved if we are thoroughly tracking our interventions, constantly reflecting on our practice, and undertaking continuous self-evaluation through gathering data and seeking to constantly improve what we are doing, constantly improve our practice, constantly question what we're doing. And that is essential if we're going to improve outcomes for those who use our services. And you mentioned budgets, Ken, in your opening remarks, we were planning to set the council budget very soon, and then last week we found out we were having even more money thrown at us because of the pandemic, and that itself presents all kinds of risks. But my worry is once we get through Scottish parliamentary elections this year and then local government elections next year, we'll be in for quite a few lean and tight years. So as those budgets become tighter and tighter, it's absolutely critical that we have the evidence of high quality interventions which really make a difference to people's lives. And I think that this will allow good quality community work not only to survive but to thrive post-pandemic. And over the past year, we've seen so much media coverage of our colleagues in the NHS, rightly so, those who work in residential care homes, those who've provided critical childcare, and teachers and support staff who've supported remote learning or who've worked in our schools. We've clapped for carers and we've clapped for the NHS, but throughout the crisis of the past year, our community workers have continued to work exceptionally hard, and I've seen that from my own two eyes and through my own lens here in Aberdeenshire, often supporting our most vulnerable and our most marginalised. And I know from a local perspective here within this local authority just how much they have achieved over the past year, ensuring a continuity of targeted support to those who most need it, helping to mitigate risk of further disadvantage, supporting positive mental health and life skills, showing huge agility and swiftly shifting to online platforms to support and to support communities, and carrying out thousands upon thousands of hours of contact time and learning hours. And throughout all of this, they've continued to gather evidence of what has worked and what has made a difference. And also what hasn't worked. That's as equally as important as what has worked. And this has allowed them to adapt and to refine the offer that they're providing to our communities. And I think that the community work as a sector has displayed the professionalism of the highest standard, rooted and grounded in professional inquiry and research and evidence gathering at the most challenging of times. So looking forward, I think that it won't be until we are well and truly into the recovery phase of COVID, which hopefully we're coming towards now, that society will really start to see the true worth of community work and quality community work as we aim to improve lives, focus on community renewal, and build a better future for our communities. We'll need to respond with agility to the findings of the community impact assessments that we're all carrying out just now across local authorities, by putting in place highly effective interventions which must be underpinned by evidence and data. And this will hopefully allow policymakers locally, politicians locally and nationally to see the true value of community work, and hopefully will encourage appropriate investment in these critical services. And I think the book that we are launching today, The Impact of Community Work, is I believe, essential reading for any community worker, any community work team, or any aspiring or student community learning and development workers. And I commend the authors for their clarity, their passion, and their commitment to continuously enhancing the sector and practice within the sector through gathering evidence. I think it really will become a seminal text for this and for the next generation of community workers. And I wish the book every success. And of course, I am biased and very proud that a number of the co-authors, all the co-authors actually, have strong links to this part of the world here in Aberdeenshire. So that makes today especially and immensely proud of all my colleagues. So I wish you continued success with your endeavours, and I really commend this publication to all participants this afternoon. So thank you, Ken. I'll hand back to you.
Thank you, Laurence. Thank you. And my reference to your present role was really, I'm aware of the roles you have fulfilled, senior roles you've fulfilled in other places. So it's recognition of the significant role you have now. But thank you for your kind words about the publication and for your ongoing support for community learning and development in Aberdeenshire. That's much welcome. So we now come to the bit that Kirsty has been dreading because she's responsible for switching on a video. But I did want to check, Kirsty, before you put the video on, did you get the dog? I think you posted a question about the dog, and I'm hoping that that's been solved.
Fine, thank you.
That's good. Okay. So while we have the authors here in person, virtually, they have prepared a short video to introduce themselves, to talk about their motivation for getting involved in writing the book, what their hopes are in relation to what it will achieve, the approach that they took as a collaborative effort, and what was important for them in terms of challenging the way that they learned through the experience. So I'll leave it to Kirsty now to press the button. Kirsty.
I'm currently a Professor Emerita at the University of Aberdeen, where I'm a Professor of Education, and I've got 30 years experience of doing research in a community setting. And I've taught community work professionals over 30 years. That includes people from social work, education, and health backgrounds. And I'm currently also a tutor at the University of Dundee, where I work with doctors and dentists who are doing research linked to their professional practice. And I currently do a lot of research contracts, particularly in evaluation.
I work within a Scottish local authority. I work within education children's services. My specific role is within community learning and development. So I hold a responsibility to oversee professional learning for youth workers, adult learning workers, community development staff. And I have an important role around ensuring quality and the quality of the work we do within community learning and development.
So my name is Kirsty Forrester. I'm a senior community learning and development worker for Dundee City Council, working in the adult learning team. Although I work in adult learning and specifically within ESOL and a resettlement context within a local authority, I've previously worked in health and social work and in the third sector.
I'm Garrett. I work for the community development team as part of the Community Learning and Development Service at Aberdeenshire Council. I have many years' experience of work in the third sector, in particular in a community-led health role.
I'm Kath McKay. I've had over 30 years' experience working in community learning and development, ranging from youth work, community development, and latterly concentrating on adult learning, adult literacies, English for speakers of other languages, and community-based adult learning. And I've worked both at local and national levels.
I became involved in the writing of this book because I was aware of the limited amount of writing that was done by professional practitioners about what they do, and also the relatively limited amount of writing done by academics even. And I think the significance and impact of what we do is so important that we need to be communicating this better. So that was one of the reasons. The other reason is I'm just a theory geek. I just love writing about theory. I love writing anyway, and I love writing about theory because I think that it's so important to the practice that we do. And I want other people to be doing that as well.
You know, I wanted to really explore at a greater depth some of the links between the theory and practice, and I was pretty confident. I'm experienced in lots of the approaches that are used, that are discussed in this book, but I really wanted to kind of deepen and extend my understanding of them, and how that would work in practice through exploring, you know, some of the links to theory, broader community work theory, but also some of the theory in terms of research and evaluation and so on.
I've felt for a long time that there continues to be a gap or a vacuum around the sector, the community work sector's ability to demonstrate the importance, the value and the quality of the work that it does. This has been a concern of mine for a long time, so when the opportunity arose to be able to work with others to look at this more closely, I jumped at that chance.
Throughout my career, I believed strongly that we needed to show and to tell other people such as employers, politicians, funders, about the powerful and positive impact that community work can make. I often felt very frustrated that we were not doing this as effectively as we might. And so I was delighted when Karen offered me the opportunity to become involved in writing this book.
So much of what I know about how to be a community worker I learned on the job. And certainly I think pretty much everything I know about planning and evaluation was learned out in the field. And I was very lucky. I've been lucky throughout my career to be mentored by some really knowledgeable and experienced community workers who've taught me a great deal. And I think all of us felt that there was a lack of a really practical kind of how-to book on this subject. And so I suppose this book is about trying to address that. And for me, I really want to empower community workers and give them the tools to better be able to understand the values of their interventions, but also to be able to better argue for them.
I think gathering evidence is important because we know what we do is good, we know it, but we need to be able to show it to others. And I think there are 3 dimensions in which we need to show it. The 3 Ps, I call them: the personal, the professional, and the political. And the personal is about looking at how am I doing, self-evaluation and affirmation to ourselves of what we do and a bit of celebration of what we do. Then the professional is, does it work? Do we need to change things? It's about the project itself. And then political reasons are very much about, we may need to show our supervisor that what we do works in mentoring or in our supervisory relationship. We may need to tell funders that what we're doing works.
We continue to talk well about the work we do with passion and enthusiasm. We hear that from practitioners. I hear that on a daily basis from the people I work with, but we talk less effectively about the difference we make. And in terms of securing resources going forward for the kind of work we do, it's absolutely important. Budgets are becoming constrained, the world's in a different place. If our work is important, which I feel it is, we need to absolutely be able to show that that's the case.
If we really want to protect this work, we need to be able to say not only that it's good, but why it's good and why it should be maintained. And I think also we have a massive obligation to provide the very best learning in our communities that we can. And so this is a way of doing that, I think.
Demonstrating the impact of work is often the part of the process that is given least thought and effort and can be skipped over altogether. Sometimes the constraints of time and budget and just the pressure of getting on with the face-to-face work can reduce the priority that's given to gathering and demonstrating evidence that shows the impact the work has had on individuals and communities. This is partly because of the complexity of the work, I think, the complexity of the work that's undertaken by community workers. And we hope in our book to show a variety of methods that people can use to capture some of that complexity and demonstrate impact.
Probably the main reason is actually kind of linked to what we're really about as community workers, which is about social justice. And I think if we're serious about social justice, then we also have to be serious about knowing how and if and where we've made a difference. And therefore, gathering evidence of impact is really important, not just as an add-on, but really as a kind of core part and linked to the kind of values of what we're about as community workers.
It was a privilege for me to work with Karen, Kirsty, Sue and Ed in writing this book. We came from different backgrounds and experiences, which actually made our meetings very stimulating. I think there was a genuine atmosphere of working together based on mutual trust, respect and support. I believe in lifelong learning, and this experience challenged me and helped me to think about topics and issues differently and refine and reflect on my own understandings. And like all good learning experiences, it was fun.
Certainly, I think for me, if we don't use research skills, or if we don't widen our knowledge of different techniques, then over time, I think we become less effective as practitioners and ultimately as advocates for the communities we serve. So for me, this was just, absolutely brilliant sort of learning and professional development. I think that proper evaluation cannot really be done without a kind of an understanding of who we are as individuals, about why we are community workers and how power works in communities and throughout society. And so I think that learning to evaluate and apply that critical consciousness to our work is part of our own journey as learners, and this was absolutely that was how I experienced it.
In terms of my own practice, it's linked to that. It certainly improved my confidence. I think having a better understanding of those links between theory and practice, and it certainly made me not only more confident in gathering the evidence, but in how I understand myself as a community worker, my identity, and also my relation to other professionals and the kind of research traditions in which they sit, actually.
The writing of the book made me critique some of my own ideas. I thought I knew everything, but I needed to critique it. I needed to think about and refine what I thought about gathering evidence of effectiveness, and what I thought about research, and what I thought about evaluation, because they all matter. And so I found myself looking at what I was saying and thinking, is that right? Am I absolutely right about that? So I needed to do a lot of thinking about it. And the second thing was it gave me a sense of achievement and an ability to celebrate what we do. Because I think what we do is so important as community workers. It gave me that opportunity to celebrate.
I very much enjoyed working with others on this book. I think if you work in community work, collective working is a comfort zone. It's where we're comfortable in terms of working. I think I've been lucky in terms of the people I've worked with in recent years. I enjoy working with them. There's a lot of dialogue between myself and colleagues, but to actually engage in a deliberate collaboration to produce this book was really important to me, and I got a lot out of it. I'm just a full believer now in being able to work collectively and collaboratively, and those two are quite separate things for me. This book has been produced because there's a small group of people who enjoy working together, who spark off each other, and as a result are lifelong learners themselves.
Okay, thanks everyone for your contributions there. We've got a second video that we'd like to show, and Ed's going to introduce this one. Ed.
Okay, thank you, Ken. Yeah, so while Kirsty's doing the technical stuff, that worked brilliantly, Kirsty, the first one, so there's nothing to worry about. So anyway, I'm going to introduce the next video clip. So on the back of the book, and I suppose as a way of sharing our learning, which kind of I hope came across in that first video as widely as possible, we're developing some training based on the book. Some training for the online training platform of the CLD, or the Community Learning and Development Standards Council, the online training platform, which is called iDevelop. And a little while ago, we put out a survey to practitioners asking what they would like to see, what were in terms of focus for this training, and there were 4 areas that came up, which I can't actually quite remember what they all were, but I know that anecdote and observation and social impact studies were certainly 2 of them that we are particularly looking for case studies. So that's a kind of call out for anyone who's got a good case study in those areas. But anyway, so in terms of kind of kicking off this process of developing the training materials for iDevelop, Karen and myself ran a training session back in December based on the book with some practitioners from across Scotland. What we're about to watch is a short film with contributions from these practitioners from across Scotland, reflecting really on what evidencing impact means to them. Are you ready to go, Kirsty? Yeah, great.
It gives us a way to judge and a way to gauge if the work we're doing is having impact, if it's good work, is it worthwhile? What's the good stuff we're doing? But I like to hear as well about the bad stuff, I want to know what isn't working. Yeah. So I think it's quite a good development tool for ourselves.
Yeah, I wanted to say that what's not working is quite useful to know, and then you might, and the next stage is obviously looking at what can be done differently as well.
To demonstrate, because we work with lots of community groups, to demonstrate the journey that they've been on, start of the inquiry and the support that they require to when they get to a point where they're happy to go off on their own.
I think both qualitative and quantitative evidence, obviously, because we need the numbers and the stats and everything like that to show, but we also need that kind of case study, more impact type evidence as well, to actually show the impact that it has on individuals, as well as the numbers and such like, which we need obviously for the funders too. So whether that's, you know, through, you know, questionnaires, through games, through case studies, gathering information via interviews, just I think a range to really show that impact.
Formal ways like evaluation forms, meeting people, have a video audio conversation, have an interview form, even the learning plan or individual student plan. It could be phone calls. Some often have a formal process set up and set number of evidence that we're looking into gathering, looking at the wide impact on wider community, or could be the family as well. An example given is working with a student with learning difficulties and how it impacts on the family.
Data's increasingly important. And one of the things that I often use, because I tend to use solution-focused approaches a lot, is you can introduce a scaling question for that. So it gives you a point at which the person feels is working well and room for growth, and it gives you the qualitative stuff. But as a counsellor, I'm always really, really interested in the person's actual experience. And that's the bit that I think has become less important because funders and decision makers, and especially with cuts, and it's all data, 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 data. And I agree with Cheryl, it's important. But what's more important for me, and I would echo community learning, is the person's experience.
We were saying the observation side of things is that, you know, it's a relatively easy thing to do for a member of staff. However, what your values are, and, you know, those of the group that you're working with, is quite subjective in terms of showing the impact there. And we also spoke slightly about the, you know, such as the pros or cons of like questionnaires, because quite often questionnaires are the traditional methods that have been used in the past, but they don't always show impact. You don't get the additional information that you need, and they quite often ask questions that are probably not really relevant to your planning or what you're actually wanting to gather as your evidence.
It is that qualitative bit that really tells a story or paints a picture, you know, and I think people relate to stories, and so you can throw a lot of numbers about, but if you have like kind of a powerful anecdote in there that like kind of personalizes or humanizes all those numbers, I think that's really important. You know, what you were saying, Hazel, just about giving young people cameras and letting them tell each other stories, that sounds like quite a powerful thing to try and do, but it also sounds quite kind of complex to do. And the young people that we work with, a lot of them, we would try and get them to tell their stories or to engage actively in kind of reflection on what they're actually experiencing or going through as learners, but it's often kind of quite difficult to do, and they can kind of keep you at arm's length a little bit, and maybe they're not at a level of maturity to have those reflective conversations just about their own learning experience. So while that is a powerful means of gathering evidence, it can be kind of quite a tricky one to accomplish a lot of the time.
So thanks for that, Ed. Thanks for introducing that and giving us a flavour of how this can be used and how it obviously has been used, and reflecting views of folk working in the field in relation to its use and how that would be helpful in their daily practice. So we're now at the bit where we get to pose difficult questions to the authors and our guests. So I see there's a few questions have been posed in the Q&A, and by all means, if you have any other questions, just pop them in. So let me go through those. So the first is from Nigel Rose. Not read the book yet, so not yet sure what's in it. A critical part of community development work is about affecting system change through a variety of forms of influence. This is a particularly difficult area to evaluate impact. does the book offer guidance on this? So I'm going to put that one to Karen.
Thank you very much for the question. It's really interesting. I think that when we're thinking about community work, we're thinking about working at 3 levels, one with the individual, one with the community, and one with systems and structures. So systems and structures are absolutely crucial to make change with. And this is often very difficult because a lot of people are employed by local government. So one of the things that needs to be done with that is to assist people to have political literacy and assist people to make change for themselves. And that's something that can be done by a community worker without being political themselves. But in terms of the impact, we always, when we're thinking about impact, we think about scale, quality, and significance. And scale is obviously the numbers. Quality is obviously the characteristics of the change, but significance is really important. And that's where we look to measuring whether it's made a difference and what that difference is, and have we influenced people. And we have a chapter about presenting findings and how you go about looking at that significance and convincing people that what you've done is worthwhile.
Thanks, Karen. Ed, could I ask you to give comment on that one from a practitioner's viewpoint?
I think what I would say, I think it's a really interesting question, a challenging one actually, but I think, you know, and I think this is a concern that we address in the book, that actually, you know, in community work, we might be good at, I suppose, sort of being able to evidence the change that we've made on a small scale, but in a sense, what we really, you know, that's kind of, you know, it's a bit, you know, what we need to be much better at is being able to demonstrate and kind of start pulling together the difference that we're making, you know, at a you know, local, regional, and national scale, and really demonstrate that importance. So, and it is a concern that we address in the early chapters of the book, and I think it's a, you know, through kind of you know, I suppose developing skills with lots of these techniques, then that's something that we would hope to achieve.
Okay, thanks, Ed. Did Sue or Kirsty or Kath want to come in on that one at all? Let's move on. Okay, so this is a question from Alison Hull. She was interested in what you learnt about yourself in the process. Did participation help force you to identify and articulate your values and systems belief? Did it change your professional and personal identity in any way? And if so, how? So can I put that to Kath in the first instance?
I think being involved in writing the book certainly did pose a number of challenges. I said in the little video that, you know, we did come from a whole series of different backgrounds, so it was really quite hard to step back and think, well, wait a minute, I wouldn't even have thought about that, or I would that's something that, you know, somebody's perspective on it was so different from my initial kind of thinking. So I learned that it's very important to listen and not feel not to feel resistant to what other people are saying, I guess, you know, but to actually just kind of get past that little bit of defensiveness and open yourself up a little bit to think, wait a minute, that's actually a really good point. And even though it might not have been my initial kind of thinking, and because we took turns at leading or working together on various chapters, so you'd be very immersed in the chapters you were actually writing. But those chapters, I guess, in particular, you thought, oh, sometimes when people would make a comment, but it did, for me, it did underpin the importance of the values of community learning, in that you've got to be a reflective learner and a lifelong learner, and continue to, often it was when you went away and thought about our discussions, that you thought, actually, you know, that's a really good point. So I found the whole process really stimulating, and I learned a lot about myself, I think.
Okay, thanks, Kath. Sue, do you want to respond to that one as well? I think you're still muted, Sue.
Maybe having an internet.
Can you hear that now?
That's fine, yep.
Yeah, you can hear okay?
Yep, please.
I would quite like to say how important it was. Yeah. How
So
important it
you're
was
fading
to
out, so you might
listen to what others were saying.
You might be better to switch off your video.
Okay.
So we get the audio. Thanks.
Okay, is that better?
No, we've still got the video.
Yeah, that's the dangers of rural life.
Try that now.
It won't go, hold on. Is that better? Okay.
It's just
the dangers of living in rural Aberdeenshire. Can I just say that I thought the mechanics of working as a group of 5 was really important for my own learning. So hearing other people's opinions, the amount of sharing of thinking was really important for me for anchoring down my own thinking. So for me, there was a series of bubbles of focusing my thinking in based on what others were saying, listening, learning, and then dedicating myself to a decision about what I might want to write. So I think I came away from the process as quite a different writer. I like writing, but usually I'm writing related documents and so on. But this turned me into a much more avid writer, I think, of a different nature. But a lot of that was dependent on working with others and the ideas of others sparking off my own thinking.
Okay, thanks, Sue. A question here in relation to the book essentially being presented from a Northeast Scotland perspective. And as such, how applicable is it on a wider front in terms of the UK or even internationally? And I mean, I might also pose that to Sheila and Laurence as well, but Kirsty, do you want to comment?
Yeah, although all of us know and have worked together in the northeast of Scotland, and I think we're all quite proud that, you know, this has come from a small part of the world. We all come from different places and we all have had different journeys, and we have all, most of us have worked internationally actually. So we all have experiences from around the world, which we bring to the writing of this book. But we also have made a conscious effort to ensure that the case studies and examples that are given in the book are do have a global dimension, and there's an international perspective, because Policy Press certainly wouldn't have commissioned it if it was just a book for people in the northeast of Scotland. And so we've consciously wrote it bearing that in mind, and to appeal to a wider audience, and to also to appeal to a broader understanding of what a community worker is. So that's not just about people who associate themselves with adult learning, youth work or community development. That's also about people who are working in communities, whether that's in a health role or as social workers or in the criminal justice system. So
you know, it was definitely written to have a broad appeal and certainly an international one.
Can I invite Laurence and Sheila if you want to come in, just with that wider perspective?
Yeah, I'm happy to come in first if that's okay. But actually, I don't think that question would have been asked if this book had been written by 5 professionals who were based in West Central Scotland. So I think that's quite worrying that question is being asked, if I'm perfectly honest. And I've spent my whole career in the Northeast championing the Northeast and, you know, complaining bitterly about central beltitis, as I call it. And you know, when I think about the times in my career, I've woken up at 4 in the morning to get the first train to Glasgow because the meeting has to be in Glasgow because it's nice and central for everyone. So I think regardless of where the authors are based, this is a book steeped in professional community work, community learning and development practice and theory. So I think the question is actually largely irrelevant. I would worry if people were concerned that the authors had a background working in the Northeast, actually. Personal view there. And some personal, very strong beliefs coming forward. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Laurence. Sheila, anything you want to add there?
Yeah, I just agree with, you know, reflect on what Kirsty said earlier. I mean, I definitely think the book has certainly a national view, a national look, because I mean, certainly we look at things not in terms of our role as in scrutiny and inspection. We look at things on a national Scotland-wide basis, not on the basis of any particular area. So, you know, I would agree with Laurence as well that, you know, it is about how does this national and international view. I could see it being used, you know, I certainly see application for it certainly wider. I've had some involvement with other inspectorates, mostly European inspectorates, where what we say and what we have to present from Scotland is certainly very much appreciated. And I think, you know, the content of this book will also help that.
Okay, thanks, Sheila. Any other comments on that one, or will we move on to another question? Let's move on. So if you were to take one takeaway from the book, what would you want to see embedded in practice in terms of what you've put forward? Let's have Kirsty.
One is a lot. That's hard. Can I have 2? I think
Desert Island disc.
I think for me, I think we need to be more systematic in our approaches as community workers. I was reflecting on the other questions, and I was thinking that quite often as people working in the community, we kind of almost dismiss what we do, and we don't, it's almost like we don't, you know, we're so used to always pushing the client or the learner forward and trying to allow them to take success that we don't take credit where we perhaps should. And I think that what we do is incredibly technical. Cav said in the film, there's a lot of complexity. And I think that therefore, you know, that sort of systematic planning and evaluation is about is about in many ways understanding and taking full credit for the work that's done. And I think, yeah, I think that would be it. Sort of.
Okay. Karen, have you got a view on this, that a takeaway that you'd like to see embedded in practice? I think you're still muted, Karen.
The thing that I think was most important was something that Sue decided was most significant, and I moved to sharing her belief, which was that we need to come together to influence practice generally, because, and the CLD Standards Council has facilitated this, but we need to come together to support each other and to support the professional standards that we put across, so that others understand what we do and others have a grasp of the impact of what we do. And this is in the conclusion of the book.
Okay, thank you. Can I maybe ask Sarah, what are the plans for disseminating the book and getting the messages to a wider audience?
We spoke before briefly about the blog. So we've had 3 blog pieces coming out of the writing team, which have gone out to, I don't know how many people, I could find out, but a great deal of, many people do read our blog. And then in terms of promoting the book more widely, I found it very interesting hearing about people in public health. And I'm wondering, I'll have a chat with my marketing colleagues after this, as to really making sure that we are getting beyond. I think we've certainly been good at telling the community development, the community work world about the book, but I wonder if we could do more in terms of allied professions, in terms of health and occupational health and other areas. So I think that's something for me to take away and to talk to my marketing colleagues about.
Certainly one of the other questions was about its relevance to other professional groups. And I don't know if the authors have any thought on that in relation to some of our workers in other fields. Sue, do you want to come in?
Right. Is that okay? Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you.
Yeah. Okay, excellent.
Okay.
Well, in terms of the currency of the book, elsewhere, I think it's an accessible book myself for people in a whole range of settings. And I think one of the things I found interesting is that Fran Crawford, who very kindly wrote us a piece on the back cover of the book, so an endorsement. She works in Australia and in America as a community development specialist, and she has seen the book as highly relevant to people that she teaches, works with, speaks to. So my feeling is that it's got currency globally. So that's just, backing on to what others were saying earlier. But I've worked as a community development worker, and that work has bordered on health work with Ed. It's bordered on children's services work with social workers. It's bordered on older people's care settings. So I think the work that I do and what we're trying to convey in the book fits in a whole range of different shoes, a whole range of different professional shoes, in my view.
Okay. Any other comments from colleagues on that one? Karen, in terms of, I know your work does involve other professional groups. Would you see this having a relevance in relation to that?
Yes, it would have relevance to other populations, especially health, because we wrote it with those professions in mind, because we've all worked in social work, health, education. We've got different backgrounds, and we've drawn examples from health in the book, as well as from community work more generally, because a lot of the health is a very broad concept and it's generally linked to well-being, and health and well-being are brought together. And this is one of the things that is very important to community work and CLD context, is working towards well-being of the individual, the community, or organizations. So I think it's very important that we look at it, that when we wrote it with these other professions in mind. So it's of relevance to health professionals doing community work. It's of relevance to policy and planning in local government, and it's of relevance to educators in many different contexts.
Okay, great. Thanks, Karen. I said flippantly at the start that, about a sequel, whether that might be around resolving conflict, but is it something you're thinking about in terms of another publication drawn on what you've experienced in putting this together? Is that something you have some interest in, energy, commitment to? Ed, do you want to comment?
Well, I could. I'm not sure. I think maybe Karen would be best placed to talk about the detail, but the short answer would be yes. Certainly, I think most of us are looking forward perhaps to working on another book project, or at least a proposal for a project. Yes, I think as you've seen today, we've all got a lot from it. But in terms of the detail, I don't know if Karen, you want to say any more?
Yes, we've just put together a proposal for Policy Press, which is going to go to them shortly, called Community Work Theory for Practical Purposes. And it's about bringing theory and community work up to date, because there's some very important work done in the 60s and 70s, which is still important, but there's a lot of work that's been done since then that tends to get forgotten about. And we want to look at ways. It's going to be another book which is very much about practical how to do it. And it's about theory, but what that means in terms of what you should actually be doing in professional practice. So that's something that we thought about very hard about, and we decided that it was very important to bring people together for that book. So we've got a new idea, which is to bring teams of people together and get them to help us to work on the content from the practical perspective. So we're much more eclectic and have many more ideas about what's cutting edge in terms of professional practice. So that's very exciting and something we hope to do.
Well, that was a thumbs up and a smile from Sarah, so I think it should be well received. I just wonder from Sheila and Laurence's perspective, do you see that there are other gaps in terms of the type of information and challenge that this book represents? Would you see that as a welcome addition in terms of what's currently available? Sheila, do you want to comment?
Yeah, I was thinking actually when Karen was talking there and others were talking, I suppose in the post-COVID landscape, I think it's very important because there's no doubt that things have changed enormously and will continue to change. And I think how we respond to things and different challenges will change. And yes, I think that, building on, obviously what went before, but I think now there are challenges, particularly I think around health and well-being is a huge issue. I think people will probably agree with that. So yes, anything that helps the current context and CLD's in particular's response to the current crisis has been interesting and I think welcomed.
Thanks, Sheila. So we're nearing our time for closure, but I would like to give our authors the opportunity for a last word. So I'm going to go around you one at a time. So if you have any words of wisdom for the audience that's with us, I think we've 120 odd people online for the launch, which is great. But let's start with you, Karen. I think you've been a key linchpin for the project. So any closing comments from yourself? I think you need to turn your mic on.
I just want to say thank you to the co-authors, because it's been such a joyful experience, and I think it's something that the book is something we're going to celebrate, and it's just been fantastic to work cooperatively on a book, because I've written books before but on my own, and this was much more satisfying.
Thanks, Karen. Kirsty?
Yeah, just to say thank you to Karen for giving us all the opportunity. I think, she said that she felt it's important to have practitioners writing about what they do. And I think that's just a great opportunity. And to say for the next book, we've decided that we want to get people to be kind of advisors for us on the various chapters. So I think we want to be more collaborative. And I feel personally that we're very lucky to live and work in Scotland, and although obviously the pandemic has presented lots of problems and challenges for us as a sector, I think we've really come together, and I've made some amazing connections as a result of the way that we're all working now across Scotland and wider. And and I'd like to say thanks to the Standards Council and Education Scotland for the way that they've kind of facilitated that for all of us. But yeah, I just think it's great to kind of consciously try and engage in this sort of critical reflection with a critical group of pals, and yeah, it's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Kirsty. Kath, do you want to say a few words now?
Yes, I think if this book can make a difference in that people think at the beginning of their work about what evidence they are going to need and going to how they're going to demonstrate that. I think if this book makes that bigger and better, because I know that the work that community workers do is so powerful and makes such a difference to people's lives. So if the 5 of us working collaboratively together results in that becoming a real forefront in people's thoughts, then I would be very happy.
Thanks, Kath. Ed?
Well, it's certainly no gems of wisdom, I don't think, but I suppose you know, picking up on a few things that people have said, it's you know, I guess kind of now more than ever, you know, what we've been through in the last year and what we're going to come up against, you know, in the coming years as well. I'd hope this book, you know, when we wrote it, it was timely, but I feel now it's even more timely. So yes.
Thanks, Ed. And lastly, Sue.
Yeah. Okay. Can you hear me okay, Ken?
Yeah, that's great.
Okay. I wanted to say a couple of things. The first thing is that this book's been really important to me because I've come a career from being a very grassroots practitioner through a number of odd routes to be where I am just now, involved in things at quite a high level, policy level, and influential level nationally as well. But here's what my thinking is. The most important thing if you're a community worker is that you do a really good job. That's the most important thing. But the second most important thing is that you can show it. Otherwise, there's a danger all may be lost. And that's what I'm very acutely tuned into at the moment, given the world of budget constraints that we're in, etc. So that's a key message from me. But secondly, I know that in my own service, we have a staff book group. I better just clarify, I don't think it involves bottles of wine in case Laurence is listening too quite closely there, but it's a professional book group, and they were using this book as one of their books. And what they'd done was take it chapter by chapter, and people commented on elements of the chapters. So what was happening there is exactly what I hoped for from this book, that it would be used to inform discussion. It's not a book you sit and lock yourself in your office with, but it's a book that you might use in that way. So I was so pleased that it was used in a discussion group by a group of practitioners. That's really what I wanted to happen with this book. And I just want to say thank you to my co-authors. I so enjoy working with them. I have to say one thing, most of our meetings have involved quite a lot of cake. So just in case Policy Press have other authors who also use that method of writing, a lot of cake involved in our writing escapades. Anyway, that's what I wanted to say.
Okay, thanks very much, Sue. So just a closing comment from me as your host. So the most important thing for me was to get through the agenda, which we have done, and also to pretty much finish on time, which I think we have done. But in the course of that, I think that's been smashing presentations and commentary about the book. Could I add my congratulations on its publication and the support of Bristol University Press in spreading the word. I'm grateful for Laurence and Sheila and for your commentary. I think that's really helpful. And can I thank all of those who are joining us online. to make this a special launch event for the publication. So until the next launch of the next book, can I say stay safe? Buy the book. I see that there's been messages in the chat. Make sure you get your 30% reduction, and don't keep the book on the shelf. Anyway, thank you very much, everyone, for participating in this. Good luck to all. Thanks.